Building a fantasy squad, back to front, you got to know the top rear guards in the fantasy game. And that's why on the Wednesday episode of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast, Steele and I are sharing our top 15 D-men in the NHL today. Let's get this paper.
You're Locked On Fantasy Hockey, your daily podcast on fantasy hockey.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy hump day, everybody. Welcome back inside the lab to the latest episode of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. I'm joined, as always, by my esteemed co-host, Mr. Steele Roden. On this side of the microphone, it's your boy, Big Flip Livingstone. You know I got to show some love to our everydayers holding us down Monday through Friday, making us your first listen every single day. Steele and I are here to continue this NHL and fantasy hockey coverage all summer long. Make sure you smash that subscribe button, and a 5-star review means the world to both of us. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Mr. Roden, already off air. This conversation is getting interesting. We're doing the top 15 fantasy D-men in the game, and there are a lot of conversations that could be had, especially about the back end of this list. However, I think the main takeaway from today's episode, and we'll continue to break down the rest of the list, the rest of the week. Today we're doing 15 through 11, is you got to get a piece of at least one or two of these names if you want to have the team to be at the top of the table at the end of the fantasy season. There are a lot of things that you can say about building a fantasy hockey team, Steele, and in my opinion, you got to go back and out at certain times. Obviously, you don't take a goalie right off the top of the board, but at the top of this list, when you're talking Cale Makar, Evan Bouchard, those kinds of names, if you can get one or two of these players, you are going to be sitting pretty. Let's get right into it, though. Over to you, number 15. We already know this is going to be some differing of opinions, but where are you at? How do you think about that little breakdown I gave about D-men? Because, look, I know one of the things you like to do is pair a big forward with a big D-man on the same team. There are a lot of different angles you can take, but you got to know who's at the top of this list.
Yeah, you always got to know the top 15 defensemen, especially when you're drafting. You know, let's say you have the 14th overall pick. You know that at least the top guys are going to get taken off the board, and having some stud defensemen on your team is always massive. And again, me, like a small, very weird superstition of mine is to pair up a forward with a defenseman on the same team, one that can rock on the power play, rock 5-on-5, and that's what I just like to aim for, and that's what I like doing when I draft my fantasy team. But drafting a stud defenseman, you need at least three of them, at least stud defensemen, 3 stud defensemen on your fantasy team to do very well and be successful in your fantasy league. And yeah, we're going to have a little bit of a different list, different of opinions here, and I'm going to try to sell you on a couple players. I do want to start off with my honorable mentions, though.
Yeah.
My honorable mentions, it was very hard not to put them on this list. Like you said, this was very hard to make this top 15 list, fantasy defenseman list.
Yep.
But starting with my honorable mention, I'm not going to dive into the reasons of why I left them off or why they're not on there, but honorable mention, Shea Theodore and Zach Werenski. Easily could have been on this list, was probably Zach Werenski. It's just honestly the injuries that have happened over the last few seasons scare me a little bit with this player. Same with Shea Theodore missing half the season with the Vegas Golden Knights. But these are very, very strong defensemen on the blue line that when they're in the lineup and they're healthy, they rock all the peripheral categories, especially Zach Werenski. And again, if Zach Werenski can stay healthy, he honestly might be close to a 10 spot or 11 spot on this list. But for that reason, on the honorable mentions, at number 15, though, I have Mike Matheson. And I understand just one good season from him, 62 points in 82 games with the Montreal Canadiens. But here's the reason why I'm looking at Mike Matheson right now. It's not just about the points. It's about the peripheral categories, and he fills that out to
block
a
shots
T.
beast.
187 shots, 186 blocks, 61 hits, 58 penalty minutes. Like I said, 62 points in 82 games. And another reason for that is because of the time on ice that he's gotten. over the last 2 seasons with the Montreal Canadiens. He went from 3 seasons in a row playing just over 18 minutes of average ice time to the last 2 seasons playing almost 26 minutes of average ice time. And if he can get 62 points playing 5-on-5 hockey with one of the worst power plays in the National Hockey League with the Montreal Canadiens, I believe a bottom 5 power play, this team is still very young. Mike Matheson is the go-to guy on the blue line. I'm looking at their blue line right now. They've got some interesting players. Justin Barron, Mr. Wi-Fi, Lane Hudson, Logan Mailloux, Jaden Struble, David Savard. Everyone besides David Savard is very young right now and a lot to develop in their game. And what I saw from Mike Matheson this last year is he's able to jump up in the rush and play a two game. He's able to go through defensemen and go through forwards that we didn't really see that part of his game before until this last season with the Montreal Canadiens. So I'm rocking with Mike Matheson for all the peripheral categories that he fills out there. I'm rocking with the 62 points. I'm taking a little bit of a leap of faith and hoping that he can do that 62 points again, or at least get close to there. But I'm just saying, he's the number one guy on the power play quarterbacking it. If the Montreal Canadiens can even be just a little bit better, especially when you've got Slavkovsky, Suzuki, Cole Caulfield, you get that power play rocking to at least 20-21% from what they were at this past season. Let me just bring up that real quick and I'll throw it back over to you. But this past season, the Montreal Canadiens, we're a bottom 6 team rocking at 17%. If they can even just get that up 5 more percent, and Mike Matheson quarterbacking that power play, the fantasy value is there. He fills out the peripheral categories. He gets the penalty minutes. He's getting the points now, and he's getting the average time on ice. So I like Mike Matheson at 15.
After the beast mode season he had, there is obviously an argument to be made about that kind of production falling into a list like this for sure. I'm not going to disagree with you there. However, just hard to replicate that for him next season. I will agree with you on his ability to jump up in the rush and really show some offensive flair. He made a number of really nice plays last season, almost running end to end at times. And there is that there. Just when I look at all of the other names on this list, for me, he wouldn't even make honorable mention, but I'm not going to be here to nitpick every single thing because also you and I are going to need every single minute we got on this episode. Let me just throw out some honorable mentions that I have. You know, I love Brock Faber, Thomas Harley. Those are some of those names that they're just not there yet. However, keeper dynasty side, that's why I got to show those 2 players some love. Both of them on the come up in a major way. I really love both of their games. However, Steele, my list is in flux, very much so, because there were 2 players you mentioned to me when we discussed before jumping on here, and I'll get to another one in a minute. But number 15 on my list is Luke Hughes, and I understand he's not on yours. But when I'm looking at the upside, I'm looking at the future with the New Jersey Devils, and I'm just looking at last season alone, his first in the NHL, 47 points in 82 games. I know the peripherals aren't there yet. He was a 20-year-old rookie last season, and this is a bit of a stretch, definitely. However, when I look at his game, his edge work, his skating, and his potential, which I think you're going to see explode this season, this New Jersey Devils blue line is creeping up there, in my opinion, as going to be one of the best in the business. Simon Nemec, your boy Dougie Hamilton, and now an emerging Luke Hughes. Those are 3 very good rear guards. And for me, I'm looking at this way, Steele, with the potential for Luke Hughes to really explode this season. I expect him to be in the mix for the top 10 in scoring for Dmen for sure this season. Let's see what happens. What do you think about Luke Hughes, though? Because I'll also say this. The New Jersey Devils are a very good young team with a lot of good pieces around them, and I think you're going to see a lot of goals from this Devils club this season as well.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of goals from the Devils as well, but I left Luke Hughes off this top 15 for a reason, and that's because of the peripheral stats. I really do value the peripheral stats, and the offensive game speaks for itself of what he's capable of doing. There still needs to be a lot done in the defensive zone as well for this player. Again, very young defenseman, but the peripheral stats speak volume to me about a guy like Luke Hughes and Brock Faber right now when you compare them to a guy like Mike Matheson, because again, first time for Mike Matheson getting 62 points, but I love the peripheral stats that he's filling out. And Luke Hughes, Brock Faber, they don't do that as well. And they're not even scoring as
Not
many
yet.
points right now. Not yet, but also, I mean, we're going to talk about Dougie Hamilton on a few episodes from now. Dougie Hamilton missed the entire season, or almost the entire season last year. When Dougie Hamilton comes back, when Dougie Hamilton comes back, he's going to be the one quarterbacking the first power play unit. He's going to be the one rocking with most of the minutes in the entire for the entire New Jersey. So again, that's a reason why I left Luke Hughes off this list. Wasn't even an honorable mention for me, but I do agree with you. The upside, the potential of what he can do is very incredible. I will say that he is not going to be a top 10 point defenseman next season. It's just not going to happen.
I appreciate that. Let's make a wager. It'll be worthwhile. Also, Dougie Hamilton played 20 games last season, 16 points in 20 games. Shout out the Good Niagara Ice Dog product. And I also forgot one of my last honorable mentions because he was on my list. He was off my list is Morgan Riley. He's got to get a little bit of love as a Dmen who brings a ton of power play points. He brings a 50-point each season kind of level. And for me, he hovers right in there around this list. He doesn't make it for me, but honorable mentions for Mo. Let's get to the first break right now, Steele. We're already getting heated. We'll talk about the rest of our list around the break. We're going to break down the rest of the D-men. The rest of the weekend, of course, talk about the Stanley Cup because until that bad boy is lifted, Steele and I have you covered. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. You never want a frustrating ticket buying experience when you're looking to go to your favorite event, comedy, theater, sports, whatever it is. Game Time has you covered. Make sure you're getting last-minute deals. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports and all of the events in your area. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app. Create an account and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Create an account. Redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets. Lowest price guaranteed.
And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Continue to hit the subscribe, the follow button, leave a 5-star review, and make sure you're also checking out Locked On Sports Today. You got to make the switch from Fox Sports or ESPN because you got to turn down the volume with all that shouting they're doing on their channel. Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channel app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. And once again, thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode with Flip and I. We appreciate all that love and support you show us Monday through Friday, 7 o'clock in the mornings when you can find our episodes. Continuing, though, the conversation of top 15 fantasy defensemen in the NHL right now. Number 14 on my list, it's going to be John Carlson of the Washington Capitals. I believe there is still a ton of fantasy value to be had with this defenseman. Another reason why, again, I traded for Alexander Ovechkin last year after the All-Star break. He popped off, even though it was a regression season. I think him and John Carlson still have a ton of fantasy value moving forward. A guy who came back from injury this season, had 52 points in 82 games, 40 penalty minutes, 176 shots, 194 blocks, 69 hits. He fills out the peripheral stats, like I said, which I'm always looking for, including getting the offensive side of the NHL aspect and fantasy aspect. Again, 52 points in 82 games, but I think he can do more offensively. I think he can even get to 60 points this upcoming season. It all depends on what the Washington Capitals are doing with their offseason moves, who they're acquiring, who they're trying to fill in and put into a nice position around Alexander Ovechkin, TJ Oshie, Dylan Strome. Very, very strange looking team for the Washington Capitals this past season. We're hoping I'm hoping for a couple of moves in the top 6 forward group to assist Alexander Ovechkin, Dylan Strome, TJ Oshie, John Carlson, like I said. But I think, again, John Carlson still has a ton of fantasy value in what he's capable of doing in the offensive zone, as well as with the peripheral stats. And again, for a team that was bottom 5 in goals for this past season, bottom 5 with only 220 goals. And those 3 guys I mentioned, Ovechkin, Dylan Strome, I think Dylan Strome's going to continue to take massive strides with his NHL game. I think Alexander Ovechkin, like I said, Ovechkin and Carlson still have a ton of fantasy value. That's why, for me, Carlson still comes at 14. He quarterbacks the power play. He's getting the points offensively, and he fills out the peripherals.
He deserves so much love in terms of being a very steady, reliable, top-tier fantasy blue liner over the last number of years. However, I'm not buying into Washington nearly as much in terms of the positivity going into next season as you are. He could have made the list. That's how good he's been over his career. He doesn't get honorable mention for me or make my list because of how bad I think the Washington Capitals are going to be next year. However, you and I doing this list right before free agency and moves with the roster are for sure coming. We don't know actually what that roster is going to look like come spring, come training camp. So maybe those are some angles we can revisit. For me, after that injury, I was almost ready to write him off because that was such a scary injury. So the fact that he comes back and plays a full 82 games and still puts up 50 plus points, I think goes right to your point of there is definitely value in the tank. Would I take all of these guys ahead of him? Yes, I would, including at number 14. And this was a last minute swap in because he did miss most of last season, but Dougie Hamilton's a beast. And when we talk about all of those things that we just mentioned with New Jersey, kind of different from what the Washington Capitals have going on, lots of young, positive, big-time offensive pieces on the front end and the back end. Lots to be excited about. Dougie Hamilton, I think, is higher on your list, and I'm not even going to disagree with you there. The season before, 86 blocks, 64 hits, 74 points, and a plus 23, including 20 power play assists, Steele. This guy, if he is back and fully healthy like we all expect him to, maybe it takes him a little bit of time to get comfortable at the NHL level again. 6'6", 31-year-old, absolute beautician. I think at 14, he deserves to be on this list, so thank you for bringing him up. I also look forward very much to seeing that trio of D-men that I already mentioned, Nemec, Hughes, and Dougie Hamilton, doing their thing next year for the Devils. But I think for the Devils, and I'm just going to move on and give it right back to you because we got to keep it moving here. It comes down to what are they going to do in the blue paint? Because if they have to run out Jake Allen, and someone else, everything I said, I'm going to feel not as comfortable about, Steele. But I think the rest holds true. Just got to give some love to Dougie Hamilton. I'm very intrigued to see what he does after such being off for so long.
2 New Jersey Devil defensemen at 15 and 14 for you.
Yep.
It's a little bit of a shock to me, especially with the Luke Hughes and where we're putting Dougie Hamilton. But
okay,
that, to each their own. We'll leave it at that. I do have Dougie Hamilton a little bit higher on this list, and I'll get to that probably next episode or whenever we continue the top 10, top 15 portion of this. Yeah,
if the cup gets lifted tonight, we might talk about something else.
We're going to be talking about that the entire episode. But at number 13, real quick, I have Miro Heiskanen of the Dallas Stars. And there's a reason why he's a little bit low on the lower side for me on this top 15 list. Number one is, even though the Dallas Stars were third in goals for this season with 298 goals, there was still a regression season for Jason Robertson, Rupe Hint, Miro Heiskanen as well. The year prior, he had 73 points in 79 games. This past season, he had 54 points in 71 games. I know he missed 8 games there, but still, that's almost a 20-point drop-off for Miro Heiskanen. And like I also said, the peripheral stats are huge for me. He went from 206 shots to 162 shots. He went from, he still remains at 97, 96 blocks like he did the year prior, only 55 hits. The peripheral stats are not as great, not as big as the other players that I've already mentioned. And that's why for me, with the regression season that we just saw, again, he's going to be a stud defenseman. We saw it in the postseason with the Dallas Stars. We saw it all season. He's a stud, but the 20-point difference in the season prior to this one, again, along with Rupe Hintz, Jason Robertson, even though they were top 3 in goals for, was very strange to me. And that's for my reason why I have him at number 13 on this list, is just because the peripheral stats aren't as high as the other defensemen I have, as well as the points dropped almost 20 points.
Yeah, I'm here for it, I guess. When I look at how good he is on the ice, and all of that might hold true, the eye test for me says he needs to be much, much higher on this list. The regression, all of those things are something that you have to look at. And I appreciate that you dug into those numbers and looked at it like that. I just think they're far too good. The core is far too solid. They're going to run back basically the same team for the most part. I think to expect another kind of regression of any kind, I'm not seeing it. I actually think if they regress last year, I'm going to read into thinking maybe after what we saw in the playoffs, they come out and blow the doors off the league next year. However, I'm not going to nitpick you. I'm not going to break it apart. Miro Heiskanen is a nasty defenseman. And for me, he deserves to be in the top 5. So this one is a little bit off for me. However, you're off on some of mine. And the main takeaway is this. Get yourself a piece of some of these guys. On the keeper dynasty realm as well, Thomas Harley, the honorable mentions, Brock Faber, those guys are guys you're definitely going after. Different formats, different league setups. All of these things are in flux. Let's keep talking about it, though, Steele. What do you want me to do? You want me to spit out my 13? We're throwing a break? What's going on here?
We'll come back. We'll talk about Flip's 13 spot, and we'll continue the list with 12 and 11 for both of us, and we'll try to wrap it up before the 30-minute mark. Like we said, we try to get it done all in 30 minutes for everybody out there. We will come back and get over to Flip's number 13 position. But first, thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. We appreciate all that love and support you show us Monday through Friday. 7 o'clock in the morning is when you can find our episodes. Continue watching all the content. We're talking about the top 15 fantasy defensemen on this episode. We're going to continue that all through this week. Of course, if the Stanley Cup is lifted, we will be talking about that for a full episode. For the most part anyways. And yeah, we're going to have to talk about the Stanley Cup finals at some point this week, but we will finish the top 15 fantasy defensemen in the National Hockey League right now. Flip, over to you. Number 13 on the list.
So some of these things you're working into your angles are reasons you're getting excited or looking into players, expecting things from teams. I'm looking at the Columbus Blue Jackets as a team that have a lot of very intriguing young players in terms of at least at the offensive end. I don't know what's going on with the rest of the blue line. I don't know what's going to go on in that cage, but I know I'm loving all the young Russians that they have up front. And I think a full healthy season, and this is obviously a concern with Zach Werenski. A year ago, he only played 13 games. Last year, he still missed 12 games. So that is something that, again, is polarizing in the fantasy realm. However, I'm going to look at it as this. I expect a big year from Columbus and taking a step forward, at least in terms of offensive output and potency. I don't know how many games they're going to win, Steele, but I think they are a team that's going to take a stepping out. So I'm going to buy into Zach Werenski. I love his game. He has gotten better defensively, and he has rounded it out. He's only 26 years old. Last year, he still put up 57 points. I know compared to some of the other names on this list, it pales in comparison. This is just one of those players that me personally, I'm quite high on. And I think next year, you're going to see an explosion of offense from him and this Columbus Blue Jackets team. Do I mean 100 points? No, but I think 70 plus points is very much in his realm. And personally, me, after, some of the things that you mentioned, the injury status and those kinds of things, some GMs are going to be wary of taking him, and he might be on a bad team. Those are two things that can sometimes play into you getting a player at a sneaky good round.
I can't even hate on this pick because that's exactly the position where I would be putting Zach Werenski if I was comfortable with, again, the injuries and the team going into next season.
Serious injuries, too, he's faced. So.
Very serious injuries, and that's why, for me, comes in at the honorable mention, but I can't even hate that he's at number 13 on your list.
I appreciate that.
Number 12 on my list is Victor Hedman of the Tampa Bay Lightning. What a bounce back season for this defender. And obviously, like the year prior, Mikhail Sergachev kind of took off and took the reins a little bit, and it kind of left Victor Hedman in the dust, if you will. 49 points in 76 games, but a bounce back season from Victor Hedman with 76 points in 78 games, had 31 power play points. And when you play with Braden Point, Nikita Kucherov, Steven Stamkos, all those guys, the power play is always firing on all cylinders. We saw it all regular season. We saw it in the postseason as well. They fire on the power play, and he can also do it 5-on-5. He's also a banger league beauty of sorts. 76 penalty minutes for Victor Hedman. He's playing almost 25 minutes of average ice time at his age right now. 102 blocks, 65 hits, 168 shots on net. The peripherals are great. The points are all in the offensive zone are coming up. The power play that the quarterbacking of the power play that he puts on with the performance that he puts on with the players that he plays with is all absolutely incredible as well. This team just continues to score goals left, right, and center. They are one of the their top 5 goals for in the National Hockey League this past season. And for that reason, again, Victor Hedman comes in at number 12 on my list. So much to love about this veteran defenseman.
Yes.
And again, not getting any younger as well with the entirety of the Tampa Bay Lightning team. They're getting a lot older with Steven Stamkos, Victor Hedman, Nikita Kucherov, all those guys, but still so much fantasy value and still so much talent.
For me, I'm going to leave this very quick, very short and sweet. He deserves to be higher on this list. Not much higher, but higher. Conn Smythe a couple of years ago, a Norris a couple of years ago. The bounce back season is what's inciting me the most. And all of those things that you just said about nasty, studly fantasy pieces in Braden Point, Kucherov, and otherwise, this team is still going to be a force to be reckoned with in the Atlantic Division. So for me, Hedman goes higher. However, let's talk about him on tomorrow's episode or whenever we get there, Steele. He's up there on my list a little bit more. Again, I'm just very high on his game, and I think, given he is 33 years old, I think maybe that's a caveat in playing into what you're looking at here. A lot of mileage on this Tampa Bay Lightning team as well, given how deep they've gone into the postseason over the last, I don't know, feels like a decade that they've been lurking around the top of the table. Let me hit you with number 12 on my list, Moritz Seider. My goodness me, Steele. If you hate on this one, this is a peripheral category beast. He might be, though, in my opinion, after that 50-point season. I think you and I came into last fantasy draft season putting him right up there in the echelon of maybe not Cale Makar, but that second tier of Dmen because of what we saw in his first rookie season, 151 hits, those 50 points. And then last season, he regressed a little bit, 42 points, not as confident with the puck. The shot totals go down. This season, though, when it comes to peripherals, 211 hits, 213 block shots. Yeah, the shots go down a little bit. Maybe that's just coming with a 22-year-old guy finding his way in the NHL. Any way you slice it, I'm going to keep this short because we're running out of time. Moritz Seider, I think, deserves to be on this list, whether it was honorable mentions or higher or wherever. Given he fills out those peripherals, he looks very comfortable being in that 40 to 50-point realm at the bottom end because we know he's getting better. I really, really like this defenseman, Steele, and I'm going to be going after him hard next fantasy draft season.
Yeah, he deserves to be on the list, and that's why he's slightly higher on my list because of the peripheral that he brings out, because of the offensive side that he potentially can bring, and especially where this Detroit Red Wings team is heading in the next season or two as well. So he's a little bit higher on my list, but I can't hate on the position that you've put him in right now. At number 11, real quick, I have Josh Morrissey of the Winnipeg Jets. I believe that we've seen the peak of Josh Morrissey 2 seasons ago at 76 points, 78 games, especially with the stats that he filled out. I still think he can fill out the peripheral stats, which he did better even this season, 196 shots compared to 172 shots the season prior, 90 hits, 103 blocks. He had 69 points in 81 games. Again, I think we saw the peak with 76 points, but I think this is exactly where we'll continue to see Josh Morrissey for the next at least 2 to 3 seasons, finishing anywhere from 65 to 70 points, and continuing the offensive output, especially on the power play, of what he did so well last year as well. Only 19 power play points, but played very well quarterbacking that power play and doing what he could on special teams. But again, 69 points, 81 games, 44 penalty minutes. This is a player that kind of really just blossomed out of nowhere in the past 2 seasons. And you're starting to see the skill set. You're starting to see what he's capable of doing when he's given the reins to a team. And now he's fulfilling all of the dreams for the Winnipeg Jets on the blue line, fulfilling the organization's dreams of what he's capable of doing. And he's just got to keep doing that. But Josh Morrissey comes in at number 11 for me, fantasy value wise.
He does as well for myself, Steele. And I'm butchering this list real bad here because I've been flipped around Moritz Seider and Charlie McAvoy. Charlie McAvoy I had slightly behind Moritz Seider. Had him ahead. So let me just juggle this around and agree with you wholeheartedly on Josh Morrissey. And I can just skip that whole coverage and give some love to Charlie McAvoy because, look, 86 penalty minutes, 160 block shots, 159 hits, and you're bringing 50-point value. Either he should have caught some honorable mentions or he should be on this list, in my opinion. He also is just so important to his team, and I know that's not a fantasy caveat, so maybe that's hard for me to separate at times, But when I look at his ability to play with that nasty edge, and the Boston Bruins, though, is one of the question marks why I struggled with where to put him. Because, look, you and I have been planning on the downfall along with others of this Boston Bruins team, looking at that roster, especially up front, going, where are they going to get offense? How is it going to happen? And I know they're in on players like Lindholm. I know that they want to make some moves, Steele. But I'm a little bit concerned once again heading into next season for the Boston Bruins and where the offense is going to come. So maybe that's another caveat that you have to remember with Charlie McAvoy. So he comes in at my 11th spot, and I'm butchering this real bad because I have Josh Morrissey at 10 Steele. So I'll leave that off of tomorrow's episode. But I agree with you every wholeheartedly take that you had on Josh Morrissey. Be careful with reaching for him, though, in the next draft, because I think he may have topped out. I think you alluded to that as well.
Yeah, I think he topped out as well. And look, Charlie McAvoy could be on this list. I think having him at 11 is still a little bit high just because of, again, the peripheral stats are good. Not enough shots, in my opinion. Only 133 shots for a guy who's supposed to be the number one person, which he is the number one person. And he does great. He's a great fantasy defenseman. I just think I think 11 is a little bit too high. I think, again, he probably should have been an honorable mention, or he could have, for me, if you don't like Mike Matheson, probably.
I was going to say, I'm taking him over Matheson all day long.
I honestly, from what I saw with Mike Matheson, I'm taking Mike Matheson over Charlie McAvoy this upcoming season.
Let's put that in the poll. We're putting that in a poll.
Put it in the poll. Put it in the poll. Look, I don't do very well on polls, but hey, it worked out for me last year. Shout
out to JT Miller one time.
Shout out to JT Miller, baby. Let's get it back. Run it back, baby. But look, we'll continue this list. We'll get to the top 10 later in this week. We're going to have to wait and see what happens with the Stanley Cup Finals, Game 5, Edmonton Oilers, Florida Panthers. But that is the 15th through 11 fantasy defenseman position from both Flip and I. A little bit of difference of opinions, but we're absolutely killing it out here, giving you some hot defensemen for next year's fantasy draft. Thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Once again, go check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. You can also find them on the free Amazon Fire TV channel app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. And once again, thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode with Flip and I. Have a great day out there. Good luck with all your bets tonight, and we shall see you back here again tomorrow.
Peace.